Hey artists, and welcome back to another art tutorial with Mr. White. Today we're just going to be talking quickly about some guidelines and some things to avoid when you're choosing a photo for your grid drawing. We're also going to talk a little bit about how you can tell the size of the photo right from Google image search, and how you can copy it, save it, and make a suitable size of image in Google Docs. So, when we're talking about grid drawing, we want to choose a photo that is going to work well. Specifically, that means we want one that is well lit, that has a clear subject. Typically, we want to be close up to the subject. We want to make sure that our photograph shows 3 dimensions or a sense of roundness. And you can see here the photo that I'm using for my example grid drawing. And you can notice that there are some shadows, there are highlights, there's a range of values, and the subjects are very close to the viewer. Now, in general, we also want our photos to be at least 500 pixels in both dimensions. I chose this photo and I took it myself with my cell phone. And when you take a photo with your cell phone, it's going to be at least 500 pixels in both dimensions. So if you took your own photo, you don't really have to worry about that, but we'll talk a little more about what that means later on. So thinking about those guidelines, all of these examples that I'm showing right now have clear subjects that are well focused on, that are in good detail and well lit. Some, like the shark on the bottom right, has a lot of dark areas and shadows, but it also has some really strong highlights. That helps to create a sense of roundness, or where we can see that there's the 2 sides of the shark on either side of the belly. So we can see that those are sort of moving upward toward the light because, yeah, they're more well lit. So our photo, as we notice, pictures of close-ups of people or animals work really great for this project, and this technique of using a grid makes it a lot easier for us to draw those images. So those are some good ideas. Now, some things to avoid with this. First, we don't want poorly lit images. Because our goal with this project is to create a 3-dimensional sense or illusion of 3 dimensions in our drawing, cartoons like SpongeBob here are usually not a very good solution. We also typically find that landscapes and even seascapes like I'm showing here are not super ideal. And the reason for that is mostly if we look at this beautiful bright blue and vivid photo on the right, most of us are drawing our actual artwork with pencil. So it's going to be black, white, and gray. And I put that same photo all in black and white above. And what we notice is there's a lot less detail and a lot less interest when we're using something that doesn't have a clear, focused subject. So landscapes are doable, but it's often challenging to use them to get that 3-dimensional effect. So continuing to look at some things that don't work great, we want to avoid using silhouettes or images of a sunset whenever possible. Sunsets are beautiful, and we often want to make an artwork of them. But what we find is that if the major thing in the scene is the sunset, just like in the landscape or the seascape we were looking at on the last image, the sunset, when it's all in black and white, looks kind of a lot less appealing and less interesting. So we notice that our sky becomes flat, and a lot of the rich changes in color aren't really picked up on by the value of all being in black and white. So silhouettes, sunsets are not ideal. As we look at the silhouette on the bottom left here, we notice that with silhouettes, we're seeing a very flat image. We can't tell that the girl is 3-dimensional or the ground that she's standing on is 3-dimensional because there's no change in value over that surface. So that is why it's important that we not use silhouettes for this unit. Now, for this project, if you are going to be finding a photograph, we're going to go online and take a look at that. If you took your own photograph, that's great. Sit tight for a minute or so. What we're going to talk about isn't that important for you. So, for my artist friends who are finding a photograph, if you go onto Google, you can find all kinds of images. And as I was looking for pictures of sunsets, here are some that I found. Something I need to point out to you, and you must notice, when we find a picture, what first comes up in our image search will be what we call a thumbnail. Now, you might remember the word thumbnail as we talk about it with our sketches. And in sketches, a thumbnail sketch is a smaller version that gives you a sense of the big or full image. That is exactly the same in our image search. So this right here is a very miniature version of the actual photo. And we can tell if I open that image in a new tab, and then we're going to notice the difference when we click on the image, get the bigger version of it, and open that in a new tab. And you'll notice the first one, the thumbnail size, is very small on my screen. And as I zoom in, it gets extremely pixelated or blurry and ugly. So that is not great. If I take a look at this much larger version, you notice it's much larger already. And I can zoom in a lot before I start to lose detail. Now you might be saying, Mr. White, how do I know how big an image is? Or how do I know if it's big enough? This is a pretty simple one. When you're on your Google image search, you want to be able to make sure that your photo will be at least 500 pixels or more in both dimensions. And you can see that like so. Select an image, click on it so that it gets the bigger version active, like I do right here, and then hover your cursor over that image. And what we find is that the little set of numbers that pops up here, that is the number of pixels or individual dots of color that make up the image. There are 628 dots of color going up and down, and there are 900 dots of color going left to right in this image. Our thumbnail, or the tiny version, once we have that open, which we already did a moment ago, you'll notice it also has a set of pixels. Right here, it says 9K equals 269 by 187. So that, even on the biggest side, is just about half the size of the minimum picture that we can use. So we're not using the thumbnail, we are using the full-sized image. Now I know that I said a sunset wouldn't work great for this artwork. This one might be a little bit more successful of a photo, although I see the pixel count is a little bit too small, so that's not going to be super great. So I'm going to take this nice picture of a tugboat. It is plenty big, it's at least 800 pixels in both dimensions. So I'm going to open that image in a new tab. So I'm going to open that image in a new tab. For some reason, it opened up the thumbnail first, and then I had to double check and make sure I got the extremely full-size version. Now at this point, you've got two options. You can click on the photo with two fingers and hit Save Image As, save it to your computer, and then you can either print it out directly, or you can alter the size. Now, if you've been twiddling your thumbs waiting for me to ask you to pay attention because you're using a photo you took, join us again, artists! Now, at this time, I'm going to open up a new Google document, and I'm going to load the photo that I've just saved in that document. I'm going to use that to figure out the size that I want to make my actual photo. So I'm going to go to docs.google.com/create. If you didn't know, you can open up a brand new empty Google Doc if you just type docs.google.com/create. Saves you a little step. Now I might want to save this as, I don't know, G White grid photo. Wow, that's messed up. Something like that, and that's going to help to make sure it gets that I can always find it and I can turn it in and know how to get it again. Now, I can either click and drag this file right onto my image. I can go back to the original, go click with 2 fingers, hit copy image, and then paste. Or if I've saved it, I could go to insert image and find it from my computer. There are lots of ways. One thing to notice, my photo is wider than it is tall. So I want to set my page to also be wider than it is tall. So I'm going to go to File, all the way down to Page Setup, and I'm going to click Landscape. Landscape is when the page is wider than it is tall. So now I've got that set up. It didn't change the size of the photo, but we can tell the page is much wider and not as tall, so it has done what it needed to do. Now at this point, you have to make a decision. With our grid drawings, we have 2 basic paths that we can follow. Path 1 is to print off our photo as large as possible and make our final drawing exactly the same size. If you're going to do that, you're going to want to make the picture as big as you can on the photo or on the paper. So I'm going to click on it, I'm going to drag from the bottom, and I'm going to drag it all the way over to the very edge of the page. You might notice that I have a smaller margin than your picture will or your page will normally have to start. You can change that at the same page setup where we were before. Notice mine is set to 0.5 inches. Yours is probably on 1 inch. Either one is fine, but this gives me a little bit of extra space. Now, at this point, I like to print it out as large as I can, and I notice that my image is 10 inches wide. If you don't have the ruler setting turned on your photo or on your Google Docs, you can go to View and add Show Ruler and just click that option and it will have that ruler along the top. The zero's over here, the measurements are along the right. So I know that I've got a 10-inch wide photo. That's as big as can fit on my paper, so I can turn it in and hit print. However, in the event that I wanted to make my drawing larger than my actual artwork, as in the example that I have been working on and that I share a video showing, I used an 8-inch by 10-inch photo and I enlarged it by 1.5 times, making a 10-inch by 12-inch by 15-inch final drawing. So it's important that you know whether you're trying to enlarge your picture. For the record, I find it easier to make my drawing somewhat bigger and to capture all of the details. So as I'm drawing a person in my example drawing, I chose to enlarge from my photo to my destination page. What you need to know in order to enlarge from a photo to the destination is you need to have the photo at a set, and usually it's best if it's a whole inches, so 8, 9, or 10 inches wide. You're also going to want to try to get as close as possible to a whole inch on the vertical side. And if you scroll all the way over to the left, you can see the ruler again shows up on the left-hand side. I can get rid of my document outline to have it a little bit closer. So I can see that my photo is just over 6.5 inches and just under 7 inches tall. So as it prints out, I would have approximately a 7-inch tall by 10-inch wide photograph. It's important that I know that and that I have my biggest dimension end on a whole inch. That's important because those 2 qualities, knowing the size and having the biggest dimension end on a whole inch, are very helpful in figuring out how you're going to enlarge your drawing. Your drawing will have to be enlarged by a consistent factor, meaning you'll have to multiply the height of the drawing, the width of the drawing and the size of the grid boxes by the same factor. I chose 1.5, so my 8-inch by 10-inch photo multiplied by 1.5 is 12 inches by 15 inches, and I use a 1.5-inch grid on my drawing paper.